All right, and without further ado, welcome to Women of Coal Country. Again, my name is Ashley Adams, and I'm a naturalist at Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve. And I'm so excited to be here today with you to share some of the fascinating information I've learned about some of the women who have called the Mount Diablo Coal Field home. At the end of our presentation, we will have some time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please type them in that chat box, and some of our helpers will be available today. Today we have naturalist Virginia Delgado Martinez, as well as interpretive student aide Nicole Garcia, and supervising naturalist Kevin Damstra standing by. So should you have any questions or need any help with technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to type in that chat box, either on Zoom or on Facebook. All right, now pictured here are two coal country women, Lizzie Gnocchio and Alice Lauer. We will be learning about how their lives might have been, as well as the lives of the women of the Mount Diablo Coal Field. All right. So here we see Mount Diablo, or the Black Diamond Mines as it stands today. Black Diamond Mines is in the former Mount Diablo Coal Field, and Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve is a beautiful park, over 8,000 acres of land to explore and so much history to enjoy. But this land was first inhabited by Bay Miwok speaking people. Tribal groups known as the Chupkan and Volvan lived here in this area. And those women were living here since time immemorial. Now today we will be focusing on the women of the Mount Diablo Coal Field. But if you'd like to learn more about the Chupkan and Volvan people, you can let us know in the chat box or down below. We might be able to do another presentation based on your interests. That goes with anything else that you see today. If you'd like to learn more, please let us know in that chat box. Now you can see that we have our mine portal right there, pictured on the right-hand side. That is the entrance to the sand mine at Black Diamond Mines, where we give tours underground. And you can see there's a picture of me and one of my esteemed colleagues, Natalie, whose birthday it is today, and I believe she's on this call. Happy birthday, Natalie. We are there pictured right after we took that group of kids down into the mine. So a lot of what us naturalists do when it's not COVID is give field trips in person, as well as hikes and other programs. So I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening today to join me on a virtual program. All right, so typically when we talk about the Mount Diablo Coal Field, the largest coal field in all of California, we focus a lot on the men that pulled that coal out of the hillside, the miners. You can see a lot of the miners are pictured here, and if you see what they're holding candles, because that's what a lot of folks used to go down deep into the coal mines. We know it was dangerous, terrible, hard work. But the women that toiled above ground, they had it pretty rough too at this time. We're going to talk a little bit about the hardships today that they faced. We're also going to talk about how some of the women organized in Summersville as early as 1870 to fight for the right to vote. So today we are diving into the history of women of the Mount Diablo Coal Field. Now, women came to this area from all over the globe, from Wales and Italy, from China and Australia. They all came here for one reason, the coal mines. But they brought their families with them and had to make a living here in the hills of Contra Costa County. They hoped for a better life for themselves and for their future generations. Pictured here are some young girls standing in front of the mines in the coal field. Now, of the mining towns in the area, there were 5 If you can see this map, there's a shaded area in the middle of the map, and that's the boundary of the present-day Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve. You can see that the coal field extended beyond the reaches of our present-day park to include some more towns as well. Can you find Nortonville on the map? Take a look. Nortonville, on the far left-hand side, was the largest town in the coal field, sitting at most at about 1,000 residents. And just over the hill from Nortonsville, past the Rose Hill Cemetery and down into the next holler, was Summersville. Summersville was also a large, bustling community with about 900 people at its largest census. The other three towns of Stewartville and West Hartley and Judsonville, they were also bustling communities. All of these towns had schools, boarding houses or hotels, and saloons. They were quite lively in their day, and this area, the Mount Diablo Coal Field, was known to be the center of Contra Costa County. Here's a picture of one of the coal mining communities. Can you guess which one? This is Summersville. And if you go to the park today, you can still see these iconic hills, but the buildings aren't there anymore. But this picture gives us an idea of how wild this Wild West town might have been. It was a huge community. It was a company town, and in this company town, even though it was in the hills, even though it was near the dusty coal mines, women were expected to keep up the Victorian ideals of the day, even toiling in the hot heat and working non-stop. They dressed like this. Here we have a few pictures of wives of merchants. So on the left-hand side, that is Jeannie Brown. She was the wife of Sam Brown. And if you've gone through a Summersville history tour before, you might know that Sam Brown's store was the largest in Summersville. That's where folks went for everything they needed to buy. And at the top of Sam Brown's store, well, there was a dance hall, and that's where they would have their Christmas parties. And folks from Nortonville would come over the hill down to Sam Brown's store. But take a look at what she's wearing. Here she's pictured in her wedding dress, but normal attire was very similar. So they had to work in their homes, do this domestic work, but dressed as these domestic angels, which was the Victorian ideal of the day. It was important to always look your best. And we can see that here, Mrs. Brown is wearing a lot of layers. And in a day like today, we probably would never try to wear that many layers in a warm summertime in Summersville or in Antioch, present day. But that's what they had to do. Here in this picture, Jeannie probably has a chemise on underneath her dress, so like a long, flowing, white, lightweight dress. On top of that, what do you think? A corset. So that corset is really, really tight, and you can see in the picture that ruching on her dress is helping to accentuate that small waist caused by the corset. On top of that corset, there would be a corset cover, and then a petticoat, and then a petticoat cover, and then the dress. So a lot of layers, a lot of heat, and you can see that her hair is styled perfectly as well. Now, on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have a picture of Sarah Mary Jane Wingate. We'll talk a little bit about her husband, Robert Wingate, and their family later on. But Sarah Mary Jane was the daughter of the superintendent of the Black Diamond Coal Company. And she ended up marrying a superintendent of the Independent Mine. So she grew up around coal and married into it as well. But it was hard work. Living in this time, everything was done by hand, and women were doing it dressed to the nines. Here's another picture that I love that shows the Jones family. This is Mary Ann Thomas Jones standing, and she's standing next to her husband, Benjamin Jones. So what do you notice about her outfit in this picture? see if I can see the chat. Ooh, I can't really see the chat. So we might have to, there we go. So if you notice anything, oh, her bustle, Jennifer knows, nice. He looks twice as tall. Yeah, he's sitting down. He's a tall guy. Yeah, awesome. Oh, Cynthia of corset. I just saw that joke. I love a good pun. That's hilarious. I need to keep this chat box up. So yes, her bustle. We can see that in the back she has a high bustle. This picture was taken around 1874, I believe. And 1870s was the high bustle period. So women were stuffing a lot of padding into their backside to get that Kim Kardashian type look. Still popular today. But these trends change. So throughout coal country, we really see how the bustles move. And then eventually, by 1900, the bustle goes away. We lose it completely. But you can also see that she has a ton of ruffles on her dress, lots of added frills and fringe. Do you notice the bows? She has bows in her hair. She has a bow on her dress, probably several bows on that bustle as well. So the more ribbons, the more bows you had at this time, it showed your social standing. So bows were popular. And if you can see her hair, look at those ringlets. Now, if there weren't hot curling irons, you might wonder how women had to do their hair. How do they do it this way? This is also a time where the middle class is starting to become more prominent in our society. And the middle class is trying to separate themselves from lower class by dressing in a higher fashion. So curls were very important. If you were a middle class woman, you would not be seen out of your house without curls. And how they did these beautiful ringlets was with rags, taking small strips of unwanted fabric and taking wet hair, twisting it up into little sausages and tying them, and then taking it out at night. Yes, we're talking whalebone corsets here at this time. We didn't get any other form of corsets until much later. And where did the dresses come from? We'll talk a little bit about that too. There were dressmakers in Summersville, but they might have ordered them from catalogs as well as gone into the town of Antioch and Martinez. Awesome. Okay, so it was very important to dress highly, especially if you weren't married, so that you could catch a beau, get a husband. Now, here is one of my favorite things that we have in our archives. We have the autograph book from a coal country resident named Sarah Hollywood Lauer. Now, Sarah went to the Summersville School. She grew up with her family that owned a hotel in town. And at the Summersville School, students had autograph books. You can think of them a lot like our yearbooks of today. At the end of the year, you might get little notes from some of your classmates. This note tells us a little bit about what women were aspiring to after school. It says this: "Dear Sarah, may you be happy all your life, be somebody's dashing little wife. Have turkey every day for dinner, that's good enough for any sinner. Yours truly, Joe Bones of Clayton." So it just kind of shows us that, you know, looking through a lot of these autograph books, they just hoped that Sarah would find a husband, because that's what you hoped for at that time. There weren't too many other options. Now, many of the women that did have husbands, they followed their husbands to these coal mining towns. And picture leaving all your family behind, packing up to come to a whole new place where you've never been before, at a time where we can't just FaceTime with our mamas. So I found this song that's called "Girl of Constant Sorrow." And you may have heard the song "Man of Constant Sorrow" that was made popular by "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" the movie. But this song was written around the same time, from the early 1900s, talking about what it might be like to move to a coal mining community. Now, this is just one little excerpt of the song, but I want to sing it for you today so you can get the feel of what it might have been like for these women to pack up, sometimes leaving children behind to send for them later, to come to a whole new place, the Mount Diablo Coal Field. It goes like this. I am a girl of constant sorrow. I've seen troubles all my days. I bid farewell to old Kentucky, the place where I was born and raised. Oh, my mama, I have to leave her. Mother did, now she is dead. Poor my mama, I had to leave her so my children could have bread. Just to give you a little idea of what sorrow these women might have felt, packing everything up, leaving their homes to come to a new place. And when they got there, they faced new challenges. Just to give you an idea of what women might have felt in relation to men, we have some lasting evidence. The Rose Hill Cemetery at Black Diamond Mines. I encourage you all to, well, when it's not so smoky, go out, take a hike to Rose Hill, and read the headstones. Look at the people that are buried there. You might not notice that a lot of the headstones for women are smaller than that of men. And that's reflective of the time. During the Victorian era, women were seen as property of their husbands. In fact, some historians of Victorian marriage liken marriage in Victorian times to chattel slavery. But, you know, they were somebody else's property. As a woman, once you got married, you were absorbed into your husband. And any inheritance that you might have had from your family, well, that's immediately given to your husband in the form of a dowry upon marriage. If you were able to work and earn some money of your own, as a married woman, that money wasn't yours until later on. So women had a tough time here in coal country. They were working very hard, but not getting the recognition that they deserved. And of course, if you are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color of this time, challenges were even more difficult. Some interesting research that I've had from Rose Hill Cemetery too is that many women who lost husbands early in life, maybe were only married a year or two, well, they remarried, usually a year or so after their husband's death. And when they did that, they would spend their whole lives with this other man and have children. Yet upon their death, they were buried with their first husband. Which kind of is interesting to me. It makes me feel like even in death, you didn't have control over your own body as a woman in coal country. But some people decided to take matters into their own hands and did have control over their bodies. We know that there were brothels in coal country. Brothels popped up all around the coal mining communities, but the majority of them were segregated to one area, the Sydney Flat area of Black Diamond Mines Park. And some of these brothels, maybe in the Sydney Flat or surrounding area, some of those brothels were operated by Chinese immigrants. Now, these folks found that they could make more money on the way to the gold fields than actually mining for gold. And a lot of folks set up shop serving miners. That's something that I plan to research more in the future, but don't have enough information to talk about tonight. But if you'd like to hear more about that, you can let us know in the chat. Now, pictured here are women of San Francisco brothels, and then a brothel that would have looked similar to the houses of ill repute in Sydney Flat, but is actually from Pennsylvania, because we don't have much documentation about the women that worked in the oldest profession at this time. But what we do know is that there is a story, a newspaper account of a brothel owner named Mary, a woman, and not Mrs. Cram, Miss Mary Cram. The story is an interesting one. What had happened was one patron went to visit Miss Cram's brothel that she co-owned with a Mr. Pitts. Now this patron ended up having $250 stolen from him that night. That's a lot of money. Now, and way back then, that was a ton of money. So he went marching to the constable, Sam Brown, and said, hey, my money's gone, we gotta do something. Well, Mary Cram and Mr. Pitts were arrested that night. However, Mr. Pitts was let go, released the very next morning. He was in jail less than 24 hours. But Miss Mary Cram, well, she stayed for over a week until the judge finally decided there wasn't enough evidence to hold her. Then she was released. Interesting. Another person that was breaking barriers and famous in the area at the time was Charlie Parkhurst. Some of you may have heard the story of One-Eyed Charlie. One-Eyed Charlie was known as the fiercest stagecoach driver in the Bay Area and often made trips from San Jose over the mountains to Santa Cruz on present-day Highway 17. That's a treacherous route for a car today, but imagine a stagecoach full of people or full of goods. Charlie Parkhurst was known for riding with a shotgun on their shoulder and never lost a load, never once. They were revered in the community. When One-Eyed Charlie passed away, it was discovered that Charlie was born as Charlotte, was born female. But it's interesting to know that people of this time were not settling for the Victorian ideals and domestic angels that was thrust upon the majority of women. Some people, born female, decided to take matters into their own hands. Who knows, maybe One-Eyed Charlie came through Summersville. Here's a picture of the Summersville Hotel. And I'm showing this picture because women were filling the gaps in coal country. As many of the men were toiling underground all day, women needed to fill in as some of the roles that maybe men would have done. And some of them were hotel proprietors. This is a picture of the Summersville Hotel, and it was owned by two different husband and wife teams. The first were James and Mary Dickinson, and then Frank and Bridget Hollywood. Remember Sarah Hollywood's autograph book? Well, this is where she likely spent a lot of time helping her family, doing a lot of work. Because with all of those miners staying in this hotel, that's a lot of people to clean up after. And so the wives, the women, didn't just stay at home, but were working in these businesses. There were a few other women that held jobs as well. Meet Bella. This is Isabella Janet Waters, and she was the first postmistress in Summersville. They trusted her to deliver the mail, which was huge. At this time, Nortonville and Summersville were having some difficulty with their mail system because the stagecoach driver that brought the mail didn't want to come all the way up to their communities. So it was up to some of the women to help out and deliver that mail. But Bella didn't do just that. She also worked as a Sunday school teacher. So she held two jobs. And her husband, well, he was a miner. So when we think back on Victorian times, a lot of the time we picture that common trope of that domestic angel staying at home all the time. But in reality, women had to work to support their families. One income was not enough. Sound familiar? Here's another picture of Bella. I love this picture because here she is with all of the school children of West Hartley, one of those towns that was a little bit east of Summersville. Can you find Bella? She's in the very back, standing in the doorway, the one woman between the two tall men in the back. This picture was taken around 1890. And I chose to show this picture because, sadly, Bella lost 3 children while living in Summersville. 2 of them are pictured here. If you can see the young boy in the front row to the far left, that's a little blurry. Well, that's John Robert. He died at 5 years old of diphtheria. You go into the very middle, the small little girl in the center with the bonnet on. That was Edna. She passed away at just 3 years old. And a few months after, her brother, Willie, at just 9 days old, passed away. All from diphtheria. Now, if you go walk through the Rose Hill Cemetery, you can see their gravestones still today. And many other children that died of disease, scarlet fever, diphtheria, smallpox during this time. So imagine, as a woman working day and night away from your kin, with all you have is your children, and sometimes you lose them to disease. Now, one coal country resident remembers that people that died of illnesses, well, they were buried at night. And they remember seeing the torchlight going down the main town and up to the cemetery, which meant that another child was lost that day from these terrible illnesses. Just another hardship that women had to face. And these kids, they were facing hardships too, because they also had to work. Boys as young as 8 years old were sent down into the mines, and often they attended night school. And the girls, well, they were working hard at home too, caring for livestock, the house, cooking. Sometimes doing other work, like dressmaking. Someone earlier asked about dressmaking, and here on the left-hand side is Martha Jones. Now, Martha Jones was one of 9 children, and her parents immigrated to the Summersville area from Maryland. And in the, what year? In the 1860s, I believe, she was listed on the census as age 18 and a dressmaker. Age 16 and a dressmaker. So she was one of the people that were making those dresses in Summersville. Sadly, Martha passed away at the age of 18, and you can see her headstone in the Rose Hill Cemetery as well. Now, on the right-hand side, this is Ellen Jones. And Ellen Jones came here to Summersville in the 1880s, and her daughter was also a dressmaker. So we don't have a picture of her daughter, Zipporah Jones, but Zipporah was a dressmaker, and I wonder, did she make this dress that her mother is wearing in this picture here? Now, interestingly, the mother, Ellen Jones, lost her husband about 20 years before she passed. In that time, those 20 years that she was without a spouse, she had to find a job. So in that census, she was listed as a domestic worker, as a housekeeper. But the years before, when she was married, she wasn't listed as a housekeeper. So that shows us that as soon as her husband passed, she needed to find work, and so did her daughters too. So that might be why Zipporah became a dressmaker and why she became a housekeeper. So housekeeping was another common job that women had throughout the hotels, as well as their own homes. All right, here's another picture of some folks that were doing domestic help. You see the building on the far left side? Well, that was a hotel and a candy shop. But if you look at the building that's right in the middle, where there's a porch and some women standing on the porch, that was a boarding house. And the women standing there in the white aprons, they were the cooks. So some women cooked for these men. Now, not all cooks were women. There were cooks at other boarding houses that were men, but here they were women. And look at all those men standing around outside. That's a lot of mouths to feed. So no doubt they were working hard all day to prepare breakfast, lunch, and dinner for those folks. Now, I've also heard of an account of a woman that I want to look into more. Her name is Jeannie Gomez. And Jeannie Gomez was known for bringing tamales into the towns of Nortonville and Summersville. And apparently they were so delicious, everyone would run out to meet Jeannie Gomez as she came through town with her tamales. And of course, if women did want to do work, well, they weren't able to keep their own earnings until around 1862. At that time, women were able to apply to be their own boss. So here we see a newspaper article from 1870 of one Jane C. Smith that's being announced that she is now going to be a sole trader. She's going to be a businesswoman without a man. It made the papers. So what she had to say was that, hey, according to this legislation that was passed and the amendment that happened in April 18th, 1862, I am able to have my own business and keep my own money. The business she intends to carry on is that of the purchase and sale, leasing and mortgage of real estate. She was a real estate agent in Antioch in 1870. How cool is that? And the women that didn't hold jobs outside of the home, well, they still had to work in the home. This is what one coal mining descendant said. She was talking about her mother when she said, everything had to be done by hand. She was lucky if she was through by bedtime. She had the worst part of life. The mines were tough, but there, the miners, life wasn't as bad as hers. And what they mean is that women were not only cleaning their own houses, but they were also taking care of livestock, doing laundry, doing the mending, doing the cooking. It was a lot of work that all had to be done by hand, and even just going to fetch water and that could take a great deal of time. So often they were working from sunup to sundown, and even into the night. And imagine doing all of that while pregnant, because these women stayed pregnant. They were pregnant all the time. Here's that picture of Sarah Mary Jane. She was pictured in that long gown earlier. This is her husband, Robert. Robert was the superintendent of the independent mine, and they had 8 kids. Look at that. They had 8 kids, almost all 2 years apart from each other. Now, maybe they really wanted to. That's great. You know, some people love big families, but there was also this little thing called the Comstock Law. And the Comstock Law of 1873 made it a misdemeanor to possess any type of material that talks about women's health. It was listed as obscene and could land you in jail. So there was no contraceptive to speak of unless you spoke in private, which maybe some women of the coal country were brave enough to do. But the majority of the women had a lot of children. Here's another picture. This is the Floyd family outside of their house in Summersville. Yes, this is one family, one immediate family. We have the husband and wife and their 12 children. Can you find the wife, Mrs. Floyd? She's sitting there with a younger girl near her knee, and her oldest daughter is on the other side to the right of the husband. That's next, in between the wife and the 2 sons there, Mr. and Mrs. Floyd and their children. And they lived in that home that's behind them in Summersville. It was probably pretty tight. And being pregnant all the time was not only uncomfortable, but it was very dangerous. Many of the women that are buried in Rose Hill Cemetery died from childbirth. On the left-hand side, we see the death announcement of Mrs. Buxton, known as the wife of Thomas Buxton and the daughter of John Jones. Her full name is not even mentioned there, but she died in childbirth, as did Eva Bryant next to her on this announcement here. Now, Eva Bryant passed away shortly after giving birth to her daughter, Laura. But it was said that Eva was in bed for 4 months before she passed. So many women had this hardship of dealing with childbirth without hospitals and usually without doctors, but luckily there were lots of women that acted as heroes in this time. With all those children, they needed schools. So another job was to be a teacher, and a lot of women were. Here we see Mary Martin, the teacher of the Summersville school with all of those pupils. Imagine having all of those kids in one room. That's a hardship right there. But this was her job, and she taught in that one-room schoolhouse in Summersville. Now, if you notice, if you take a look at the children, you'll see that a lot are female, a lot of girls, because most of those boys were underground in the mines and going to night school. You might also notice that the flag is backwards. And the story goes that Mary Martin asked a few of the students to hang the flag for her, and that's the way it came out. Ooh, I see that the chat has a few different things. All right, yeah. We're gonna take a look at that later on too. Okay. So with all of these children, they were being born and somebody had to help with that. So there were some coal country heroes. And the main one that a lot of people know about is Sarah Norton. So if you've been up to the Rose Hill Cemetery, you may have seen Sarah Norton's grave site. Sarah Norton was the wife of Noah Norton, who founded Nortonville. And Sarah was a midwife. She helped to deliver what this article says was over 600 babies, never losing one. So Sarah was not only a midwife, she was a godsend to these women that were giving birth in the canyons of the Mount Diablo Coal Field. Often when a woman was a midwife, she got the nickname of Granny. So we see some oral histories that talk about Granny Norton and a few of the other grannies that lived in the area too. She wasn't the only midwife, but she did a lot of work. In fact, she was answering the call for a client in Clayton when her stagecoach got into an accident, and that is sadly what ended up killing Sarah Norton. But she is buried at the Rose Hill Cemetery, and if you go up there, please say hi to Sarah there and know that the coal country hero is still overlooking all of the children in the cemetery. All right, now these women, with all of that hard work that they're doing, toiling above ground day and night, they decided that it was time to have some representation of their own. The women of Summersville formed a suffrage society starting in 1870 to organize for the right to vote. But I want to read you this article because it talks a little bit about the suffrage society and gives a tone for what the rest of the community might have thought. It appeared in the Contra Costa Gazette, September 10th, 1870. The ladies of this place are determined to keep up with the spirit of the age. They are to meet today to complete the organization of a women's suffrage society. They have my best wishes for their success, but when they obtain that desire of their hearts, I hope they will not be like Louis Napoleon, have to attack the enemy as to gain an opportunity to surrender themselves. But who knows? But that may be one of their tactics. So we old bachelors had better beware. Shows you a little bit of the sentiment of the time for these women that were organizing for their right to vote. But it's important to remember that this fight was going on long before 1870 across the nation. Here's a brief timeline of some of the main points of suffrage. Starting in 1820, groups were beginning to gain steam. And throughout the 1800s, women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who's pictured here sitting, were observing the women of the Six Nations tribes, more commonly known as the Iroquois Confederacy. They were studying them because they found out that, quote, Native women had power beyond our wildest dreams. And it was true. According to, for a European woman, seeing what was going on in the Iroquois Confederacy, it must have been incredibly enlightening. For them, it was opening their eyes to realize that this is not our God-given stance in society. We can be equal. And it was because Iroquois women were seen as the doorkeepers to life. Women had the inherent right to recall a leader if they misbehaved, or they had the right to veto war. Women of the Six Nations had complete control of their own bodies, including the right to abandon an unwanted pregnancy. They had control over property, custody of their children, the right to initiate divorce, the right to fulfilling work. So these European women were thinking, hey, wait a minute, we want that too. And thus the organization began. And in 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention happened, and it was modeled after tribunals held by the Iroquois Confederacy. But not everyone was able to attend this convention. African American women were not permitted to attend. Everyone that did was white, except Frederick Douglass, who was one of the few men in attendance and was said to give such a resounding speech that it swayed the minds of anyone that might have been on the fence at the time. By 1852, Wyoming became a state, and women automatically had the right to vote in their constitution. In 1872, a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth turned up to a polling booth and was turned away. The same time, Susan B. Anthony was fighting for a ballot and was sent to jail. And it wasn't until 1910 that some of the Western states began to give women the right to vote. Let's talk a little bit more about Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was born enslaved, and her first experience with the court was fighting for the custody of her still enslaved son. And she won that custody back. It took a lot of fighting and raising money, but she did it. And after that, she became a wonderful orator. She traveled the country giving speeches on denouncing slavery and uplifting suffrage and women's right to vote. She said this: "There is a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about the colored woman. And if colored men get their rights and not colored women theirs, you see, the colored men will just be masters over the women, and it will just be as bad as it was before." I think that quote is very powerful. Another thing that she said, Sojourner Truth is known to have said, "I feel safe even in the midst of my enemies, for the truth is powerful and will prevail." And I think of that quote when I read the magazine articles and newspaper articles from Summersville, because the women that were here definitely had enemies. Here is a picture of a newspaper article from the Antioch Ledger on October 1st. So that first one announcing that we have a suffrage society, that was in September. In October, this came out: "Women's suffrage, the negative side." This writer said, "The ballot is not therefore necessary to women. Her just rights may be amply secured without it. In the future, as in the past, her fathers and brothers, her lovers and admirers, will be easily persuaded to concede every reasonable demand, every just right." So basically saying, A woman has a man. What does she need the vote for? This was not the only negative article regarding suffrage in the Antioch Ledger or the Contra Costa Gazette. Several articles were written very similar to this, but they were met with rebuttals from women who wrote their own editorials. We also saw a lot of people writing of accounts of suffragists being abused in a way to scare the suffragists of Contra Costa County and of Summersville. They wrote of accounts of women being shunned from society. They even wrote of an account that happened in Colorado where people climbed to the roof of a building where a suffrage meeting was happening and proceeded to drop rats down on the women, saying how terrible would something like that be to happen in Summersville. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a threat to me. But the women of this place resisted because they continued to organize and continued to fight. And the women of Contra Costa County were looked to as suffragists that were doing it right. Here's an article from a newspaper talking about the way that suffragists in Contra Costa County are changing minds. Basically, they held dances. They would have dances and offer lunch, sing a suffrage song or two, tell a suffrage story, and by the end of the night, minds were swayed. The women of Contra Costa County were so powerful that Susan B. Anthony herself came to Martinez to address them. So our women of the Mount Diablo Coal Field started it all. And eventually, they received a brighter future for their daughters. This is a picture of Florence Lauer. She was the daughter of Sarah Hollywood. Remember that autographed book and that hotel? Well, this is Florence dressed up for the 4th of July. Surprisingly, 4th of July was a really big deal in Summersville, even for a community of mostly immigrants. 4th of July always had parades and concerts and explosives as well. But in 1911, California finally ratified the right to vote for women. And it wasn't until 1920 that women across the nation received the vote. But it's important to remember that that wasn't all women, because due to the fact that Native Americans weren't looked at as citizens, Native American women were not able to vote yet. And due to the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese Americans were not able to vote yet. In fact, it wasn't until 1952 with the McCarran-Walter Act that granted all people with Asian ancestry voting rights in the United States. But the organization and tenacity of the women of Contra Costa County sent shockwaves throughout the state and gave a resounding yes to the vote in 1911 for women's right to have a say in what happens in their government. Now, we celebrated the anniversary, the centennial of the 19th Amendment earlier this week. And as we continue to celebrate in through November, remember the women of Contra Costa County that faced hardships, but stuck together to fight for their right to vote and for a brighter future for their daughters. I want to thank you all for joining me today. And I want to give a huge shout out to the woman in this picture, Tracy Parent. Without her over 30 years of research, I wouldn't have been able to find out all the stories that I found out. I'm a new staff member to Black Diamond Mines and still have a lot to learn. So if you want to hear some more stories, please give us suggestions on things to research and let us know in the chat box. I also want to thank the Contra Costa Library for making all of their newspapers public, and my supervisor, Kevin Damstra, for giving me the time to research these important stories. You can join us next week on Facebook for some Kahoot trivia. I believe we have some symbolism about the Rose Hill Cemetery, some symbols and secret societies. So if you're interested in that, please join us. You can also catch me in the park next weekend for the self-guided Summersville History Walk. So on the 29th from 5 to 7, you want to chat with me with your mask on, come on out to the park and say hey. And if you want to learn more about coal country, check out our Summersville self-guided tour. You can find it in the latest edition of the Regional in Nature, as well as walking up to historic Summersville at the upper parking lot at Black Diamond Mines. We have some self-guided tours right there in that brochure box. So without further ado, I will say thank you again so very much for being here today. And I will open it up to questions and answers. And if we have some things in the chat that I missed, Virginia, Kevin, and Nicole can let me know if I missed anything, but I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All right. So I'm just gonna go through some of the chat features here now and see. Bella stamped out of laziness. Was she just stamping? I don't know that. The same Sam Brown, married to Jeannie, yes. Yeah, so California became a community property state from the time of statehood, but it wasn't always followed. That law wasn't enacted. And a law is only as good as the people that use it. And that law had been overlooked until later on. But yes, California was a community property state in a huge part because Alta California was part of Spain and then part of Mexico. And during that time, women were able to be sole proprietors and keep their own earnings. So a big thank you to Spain and Mexico for that. Just looking through. Did Bella make more money than her husband? That's a great question. The answer is I don't know. That's something I could look into more, but it's really hard to research something that detailed. Because a lot of the research that I did today, I'm finding information from birth certificates, death certificates, and newspaper articles, and some oral histories. But that's really it. So in terms of how much money they made, unless we have a family ledger, that might be difficult to find out. But maybe there's a descendant out there that has some more information. Miners made about $1 to $3 a day, so perhaps she was the breadwinner. Yeah, postmasters and postmistresses, they were held with really high regard in the community. I've read several newspaper articles that say that. Anyone that was to speak ill of the postmaster, whoo, you got some shade thrown on you right quick. Or you got some people giving you the side eye because that was not cool. Postmasters and postmistresses were held up with really high regard. So odds are they did make more than a miner. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go down. I see that there's some new questions. Oh, wow, you're all so welcome. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you all so very much for your sweet, kind regards. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. Ashley, did any woman own land? That is a good question. Not that I know of, but perhaps. That is something that I haven't really researched any land records, but those are probably out there and we can do some digging on that to see. Did women own land? I have seen in some maps that list out women's homes without any man's name attached. So possibly they did. Good night, Natalie. Thank you, Lucy. Will this be available to replay? Linda asked yes. The answer is yes, we are recording it right now and we will be posting it back onto Facebook. I will probably just edit out a little bit of me in the beginning trying to set everything up, but other than that, it'll all be there. Awesome. All right, so I will ask Virginia, Kevin, are there any questions on Facebook that we haven't seen? You can unmute yourselves too if you have a question. You can unmute yourself by taking your cursor and going to the bottom left-hand corner and clicking that microphone.
Hey Ashley, it's Virginia.
Hey.
Everyone is just saying how wonderful this program was and just saying that they've learned a lot. Yeah, and then we have a lot of folks wondering again if this will be posted, and you've answered that and definitely will be posted.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you.
All right. Well then, thank you all so much.
Hey, this is Cynthia.
Hey, Cynthia.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this was a really good presentation and a lot of really good information for us to chew on.
Oh.
And yeah, and I'm looking forward to thinking about it and coming back with some more questions.
Oh, please do. Yes, please. This is not the end.
I was talking to Tracy earlier today, and the thing is, we know this park now based on its topography and its nature, but we're not like we're not totally aware of the cultural history of this, and it'd be really cool. I was proofreading one of the oral histories, and there's a memory map of where the houses used to be.
There is.
It would be really cool to have that included in a brochure when you're walking through the park, so you can see where the houses are and everything.
Absolutely. You know, it really would be. That might be something that we need to, you know, we've been thinking about redoing our historic Summersville walk. We have some posts out there with some numbers and possibly redoing that. Yeah, we'd love that. Were there any doctors in the area? Most doctors had to come into town from Antioch and Martinez and other places. So doctors were often sent for, from what I read. Doctors were often sent for in other areas. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't a doctor living in Summersville, Nortonville later on, but from my research, it looks like all doctors had to be sent for from somewhere else. Thus, the importance of the midwives. Yes. Go ahead, Cynthia. Oh, it looks like Lucy raised their hand. Lucy, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
I did unmute myself. You can hear me?
I can, yes. Hello.
I wanted to, it's interesting to me that a lot of what you were reporting on was happening in the early 1870s, and in 2 years, I believe, is the sesquicentennial of the founding of Antioch as a city.
Oh.
It's the 150th anniversary. So I'm hoping that Black Diamond and the Antioch Historical Society and the city are all working together on celebrating that. Yeah.
You know, we will need to reach out to Antioch to ask if we might be able to be included on that, because that's something that I didn't realize. Again, being a new naturalist to the area, I moved here from Seneca Regional Wilderness about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. So I'm still learning so much about this area. And yes, we will talk to our colleagues and hopefully partner. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I appreciate it, Lucy.
You bet.
Oh, yes. And my supervisor is reminding me that we're working on something really very cool. So many of you might have heard of virtual reality before. And here with the Park District, we've created a few virtual reality experiences that can be viewed from a cell phone. Ooh, you can't really see. I'm holding up my phone here. I promise there's a phone in my hand. And with your cell phone, you can download an app called Time Looper. And with a simple piece of cardboard, it immediately transports you to different places. Now, we are creating a Time Looper town site tour. So Summersville town site, we will be drawing on that memory map, Cynthia, that you mentioned, to create this wonderful, wonderful experience that will feel like you're walking through Main Street, Summersville. So I cannot wait to work on that. And if you have suggestions on things that we should definitely include, things that you're interested in, let us know in the chat or on Facebook later on when you think of it. We are living in virtual reality right now. Yeah, 24/7. It is virtual is the reality. But the difference is this would be a 3D type of experience. And you can already experience a few of our parks this way by downloading the Time Looper app. You can explore Pleasanton Ridge and Sonoma and Las Trampas. And to learn more about the park, you should download that app. How about a trip through Nortonville? My ancestors, yeah. You know, Nortonville is so awesome. We have a lot of information about that site there too. Now, I believe that we are choosing to do Summersville first, not to say that we're not going to do Nortonville in the future, but Summersville is where we walk our school children through on the way to the mine for their field trips. So if we create the Summersville Historic Tour virtually, it might be able to be an extension of our virtual programming that we're beginning next week for schools while we shelter in place. So, should the Summersville one be popular, Nortonville will be down the line. Yeah, Nortonville town, the main street of Nortonville really looks like that bustling old ghost town, which is really cool. I would love to create a Nortonville experience.
Sorry, it's Cynthia again.
Hey, Cynthia.
Because if it's all virtual, you can go from any direction over to the cemetery.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. You could. We are only limited by the amount of stops we can include so that you're not downloading a huge file onto your phone.
Yeah.
So we're limited that way. But yeah, you'll be able to explore it all in the future for sure. Is there a list of people buried on Rose Hill? Yes and no. Unfortunately, we do not have any original records from Rose Hill Cemetery. However, we do have the names of, I believe, about 230 people that are interred there. And there is a wonderful resource called Rose Hill Cemetery. It's a large resource book that has every single person listed that we know of in Summersville or in Rose Hill. It talks about their life, if we know anything about where they were born, where they died, how they died, their family. And that book, compiled by Tracy Parent, the former supervising naturalist of Black Diamond Mines, that is a wonderful resource, and it is available for sale at Black Diamond Mines when we're open again. If you'd like to purchase one right now, you can call us and we might be able to figure something out. Oh, my supervisor just added a link to where you can buy it. How cool is that? I'm learning too. Alrighty, folks, I guess I'll just ask, it is now 8:05, don't want to keep you too long. I'll just ask, lastly, are there any more questions? Then all right, I want to thank you all so very much again for taking time out of your day to join me in learning about history. I am just so moved that so many of you decided to join me tonight. So please keep your eye out for future programs. Come out to the park next Saturday and say hey, and join us next time for another look at the mysteries of Black Diamond Mine and the fascinating history that's there. So thank you all again so much. Thanks again to Virginia, Nicole, and Kevin, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Enjoy your East Bay Regional Parks.